Thank you. The next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 20786 in the name of Ros McCall on improved childcare support for parents. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons. I would remind members that we are resuming business at 2 p.m. and we must allow sufficient time for the staff to come and clear the chamber, and therefore I would expect members to stick to the speaking time that they have signed up to. With that, I call on Ros McCall to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I begin by thanking members from across the chamber for supporting my motion to allow this debate to happen this afternoon. This is a really important issue, and I'm delighted that we have a chance to debate it in the last few weeks of this session. This motion speaks to two connected truths to which we can all agree: that childcare strengthens families and that strengthens Scotland's economy. Providing childcare is not simply a social policy, it is an economic lever. When parents are able to access affordable, flexible and accessible childcare, they are better to return to work, increase their hours or pursuing training and a career progression. That supports household income, reduces financial pressures and contributes to national productivity. Every parent who is able to re-enter employment because childcare is available represents greater economic participation and greater financial stability for their family. Yet families in mid-Scotland and Fife and across the country continue to tell us that affordable and flexible childcare can be difficult to find. Availability does not always align with working patterns. Provision doesn't always match demand, and costs remain a significant barrier. That is why the work of organisations such as Pregnant Then Screwed deserves our recognition. Through campaigning and evidence gathering, they have ensured that lived experiences of parents is held and policy debates across the UK. Their 2026 State of the Nation survey produced sobering findings. 2/3 of mothers have said that childcare costs are the same or more than their income. And over half of mothers state that after paying for childcare, it doesn't make financial sense for them to work. These are shocking statistics. Too many families need both parents working to ensure they have a roof over their head, heat in their homes and food on their table. Working simply to afford the childcare, allowing them to return to work, does not provide that security. When the majority of mothers say that employment does not pay once childcare is factored in, then we must ask ourselves whether the system is truly delivering for families. And with 50% of fathers expressing the same concern, we see that this is a widespread societal issue, not a gender-based one. Deputy Presiding Officer, it's in this context that I want to be clear about where we stand. The Scottish Conservatives are committed to building a country that supports working families from the very start. We believe that no parent should be forced to choose between financial stability and staying at home simply because affordable childcare is out of reach. When parents tell us that it doesn't make financial sense to work, that's a signal that the system is not functioning as it should. Work should provide security, independence and opportunity, not place families under greater strain. That is why we have proposed the introduction of means-tested childcare from 9 months. The purpose is straightforward: to support parents, ensure that every child has the best possible start in life and unlock workforce potential to reduce poverty. We know that many young children respond and develop well when nurtured at home, but that is a choice many families should be able to make if they can afford it. But too many families are forced into this position and financial pressure simply because it is impossible to balance the cost of childcare and returning to work. So by targeting support to those who need it most, we can ease the financial pressures on families, support parents who wish to return to employment and strengthen Scotland's economy at the same time. Another issue lies around the inflexibility of this system. It's pointless to offer a state-paid childcare if parents can't access it the hours that work for them. Being told by the local authority that the hours offered are, by all intents and purposes, a take it or leave it, just makes the situation completely unmanageable. That is why we would also propose to change the payment delivery system, ensuring that money actually follows the child. Our system will ensure that parents can directly select the childcare offering in their area that best suits their needs, timings and availability. That might be a private nursery or a childminder, but in many cases it can still be the local authority nursery allowing real choice for parents. Presiding Officer, the motion notes that the organisation's 2026 survey, which was just out, concluded with findings to be published. And those findings are important. They will provide updated evidence on whether families feel that progress has been made or whether pressures persist. At the same time, the Scottish Government's Early Learning and Childcare Expansion Programme evaluation strategy has been accessing the impact of expanded provision covering the period from 2018 to 2025. And we are still waiting the findings from that, and I believe they're coming out in early 2026, but we're really rapidly running out of time. That evaluation represents a significant opportunity. The expansion of early learning and childcare has been one of the most substantial public policy commitments of recent years, and it's right that we examine the outcome carefully. Has it reduced the cost burden on families? Has it improved flexibility? Has it supported workforce participation as intended? Has it delivered consistency across the regions and communities? I would say not. The Parliament, in my view, should have the opportunities to scrutinise this important review before the end of the current parliamentary session. That's not about scoring points, it's about accountability and improvement. If childcare support is to fulfil its dual role, supporting the family unit and strengthening Scotland's economy, then we must ensure that policy is grounded in evidence and open to examination. So, in conclusion, families in mid-Scotland and Fife and across Scotland deserve a childcare system that works for modern working lives. They deserve transparency about the impact of public investment, and they deserve a Parliament willing to engage seriously with the data. This motion simply asks that we recognise both the economic and social importance of childcare, acknowledge the concerns raised by parents and commit to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McCall. We now move to the open debate. I call Christine Graham to be followed by Megan Gallagher. Ms Graham.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank the member for bringing this debate. And it is important to see how early learning childcare system is working and how it can be improved. In passing, it's worth remarking that in Scotland it's free to all parents and carers of 3 to 4-year-olds, whereas in England it's means tested. The basic test is whether parents and carers take up the extra hours of funded ELC. I know there's some practical difficulties. I don't have time to get into that just now, but I agree there are some across various councils. And what improvements this contributes to the well-being and development of the children and the family and the economy, as well as saving parents and carers about £6,000 per child annually. The 2022 ELC Parent Survey found that 74% mentioned it had enabled them to work or look for work, and 71% that they were able to think about what they may do in the future. Overall, take-up of funded ELC among 3 and 4-year-olds was 97% in 2023. To date, I understand from Spice it's in the region of 100% or 100,000%. What am I thinking? In 2025, the estimated uptake for 2-year-olds, however, was 55%, a small decrease in previous years. The 2022 ELC Parent Survey found that 2-year-olds were less likely to be accessing the full 1,140 hours than older children. Access for 2-year-olds is means tested, requiring parents to receive certain benefits like income support or universal credit. So there does appear to be an issue here, perhaps of awareness of the availability of that for parents, which I hope the Minister may address in summing up. Currently, the amount provided by the Scottish Government for ELC is about £1 million per year in funding. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic had a profound impact on the lives of families in Scotland, and there is growing evidence from a range of research studies suggesting, not unsurprisingly, that many young children and their families have been negatively affected. So the benefits of ELC are extra, but they're not on their own. You can't just assess the benefits on this alone. There are other interventions such as the Scottish Child Payment to help low-income families with children under 16. Each child under 16 will get £27.15 per week, rising to £28.20 from the 1st of April. And there's no limit in the number of children in a family who can get that payment. So you can add that on to helping families and carers. In fact, this supports 5,785 children in the Borders and 6,320 children in Midlothian. Briefly, please. Yes.
Ross McCall.
and I thank the member for taking the intervention. I recognise what the member is saying, but that isn't helping parents currently right now, and I'm wondering what our comments are as to how we support parents to access that childcare.
Christine Graham.
The point I'm making is the benefits for 3- and 4-year-olds of preschool isn't just in having free nursery education. There are lots of other supports for families, particularly families that have pressures, economic pressures, to help the children. I have mentioned in passing a very short debate that I'd like to address the practicalities, which I've met myself in Edinburgh charging Midlothian people, but I have got time to do that. But the member was quite right to raise it, and the First Minister addressed that. But we have other new funding, National Breakfast Club and expanded school clubs, Best Start, which we have as well. And in the borders, 6,130 families have received Best Start grant and food payments. That's worth over £3.4 million. So what I'm saying to the member is, yes, I think it's right that we assess the benefits of ELC, but it's difficult, and I'd like to know how this might happen, to disaggregate the benefits of early learning childcare from the other supports to families. There are pressures on how it is delivered. That's a separate issue because of competing things from councils, but also the wellbeing benefits. It will be difficult to disaggregate that, as I say, from other benefits in the short debate I've been able to sort of glance over. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Graham. I now call Megan Gallagher to be followed by David Russell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And if I may begin by declaring an interest as I sit on the Advisory Board for Pregnant Then Screwed. Presiding Officer, I don't come to the Chamber today as a member of this Parliament, but I come today as a parent because last year my daughter began her 1,140 hours of funded childcare. Like many parents, I was grateful for that support. If it works, it makes a difference, it can ease the burden, and it may allow families to breathe just that little bit easier when it comes to their own finances. But I've also experienced the first-hand reality behind the policy headline. And it does come down to the fact that parents face that dreaded calculation every single month as to whether or not they can afford to have children and also be in employment at the same time. And I've done my own sums for my own daughter, because if she happened to be in full-time nursery, the cost would just be short of £1,000 per month. That's nearly £12,000 a year for just one child. That's not a small household bill. That is the equivalent of a second mortgage payment every month. And even once the 1,140 hours are available, the challenge for parents does not disappear, because funded hours alone does not guarantee flexibility or choice, as my colleague Ros McCall rightly highlighted. Like many parents, my husband and I, we've sat around the kitchen table researching nurseries and childminders, asking the same questions. Does it open early enough? Does it cover school holidays? What happens if our work meetings run late? What happens if we don't finish work until after 6 o'clock at night? Can we juggle more than one care setting? Who is filling in the drop-offs and the pick-ups? This is the practical reality of modern life for working parents. And across Scotland, parents are juggling those shift patterns, those commuting times. The part-time roles have been stitched together just to make ends meet. But they're also making those complex spreadsheets, working out whether they are financially able to stay in employment. That's why we're seeing many parents who reduce their hours, not because they want to, but because childcare structures leave them with no alternative. The work of Pregnant Then Screwed Scotland has consistently shown that childcare costs are pushing parents, particularly women, out of the labour market. Some are delaying children, and others are deciding against growing their family entirely because the numbers simply do not stack up. There's too much month at the end of the money. Yes, I will.
Briefly, Christine Graham.
I'm trying to be helpful too as well, does the member think that remote working, which isn't available to everybody, but that in a way has helped to build in some flexibility for parents?
Megan Gallagher.
Well, I remember during the gender recognition reform debate, I was breaking my maternity leave because it was a really important issue to me to vote on. I had Charlotte in one arm and I was trying to vote in the other. It can work, but not in all circumstances. But I do take the point that Christine Graham has raised. The Pregnant and Screwed have announced their latest State of the Nation report, and it is important to what comes next in terms of our childcare settings. They have said that 66.1% of childcare costs are the same or more than their own income, and 34.5% of those responded found that they found themselves agreeing with the statement, "I often find myself choosing between paying for childcare and household essentials." That shows that there's something broken in the system. And we do need to reflect on our own policies that we've spoken about in this chamber, because in 2023 the SNP did make that commitment to expand funded childcare from 9 months and onwards, and that has never materialised. We don't know what happened to the pilot programmes, and it's that lack of ambition that has prevented us from pushing forward. But we do need to be honest about delivery. My own experience shows that choice matters, flexibility matters for parents. That's why we need to look at the PVI sector, we need to look at what's not working right now. Presiding Officer, I know I need to finish, but this is not a niche policy area for me. Parents sit at the kitchen table working out affordability every single week. They tour nurseries asking about hours and flexibility. They worry about job stability and providing for their children. We owe it to them to do better. Better than broken promises, better than half-hearted ambition, better than a system we are going to work and leave families barely breaking even. Childcare will be an election priority.
Ms Gallagher, you are over your time.
And in a couple
Thank
of
you very
weeks'
much.
time,
I'm now moving on to Davy Russell to be followed by Gillian Mackay. I have actually indicated to members that we are under time constraints today. Please speak to your allotted time slot. Mr Russell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I extend my thanks to Ros McCall for bringing this motion to the Chamber. It's a matter dear to my heart, because I know my grandpa, and from time to time my grandson, he's lucky, he's got mum, dad, he's got grannies and grandpas, and he's also got great grannies and grandpas to fill the gap. However, it's a matter that comes up on a regular basis. Right. The question at the heart of this motion is whether funded childcare can be a net contributor to the Scottish economy. Nobody questions whether free public education for all is a valuable or indeed a necessary step for our economy. Perhaps if that level of provision was adopted in early years childcare policy, then we wouldn't question that either. The career benefit to parents is hard to calculate, but depending on the number of children that you choose to have, the lack of childcare provision in Scotland could cost you maybe 4, 5, 6 years of your salary throughout your career, not to mention the detrimental effect on career promotions, pension contributions, and we must be cognizant that this burden primarily falls on women now and in later life. There are long-term impacts of having a parent leave work. It's harder to save. On one income, people just, as mentioned there, you have conscious decisions to make when you're paying for kids as well. And having a parent who is not in work is strongly correlated with children growing up and not being at work. Expanding funded
Mr Russell, could I ask, sorry to interrupt you, but could you please put your microphone vertically for the record? Thank you very much.
Sorry. Where were we? We must be consistent with the fact that this burden primarily falls on women now and in later life. There are long-term impacts on having a parent leave work. It's harder to save on one income. So basically, whether paying rent or paying mortgages or mortgage interest for much longer than they would have if they were working. And having a parent who's not in work, in fact, I think I've done that, but I'll just miss that, right, makes a big difference to ending generational poverty. I have heard from new mums, and I've got a few cases in my box at the present, where those who can choose to go back to work because if you don't earn enough, you don't have a choice, you just can't afford childcare. Their feeling is that the government is playing a game of chicken with them. Sometimes they blink and pay the cost of childcare themselves, and sometimes they don't blink, leaving their jobs for 3, 4 or 5 years, which then, as the government loses the income tax that they would otherwise have paid during that time. According to Pregnant Then Screwed, it's the Scottish economy that loses out 71% of the time for mums and 50% of the time for dads. I think there is much more to say on this matter. There is a cognitive development for toddlers who benefit from professional enrichment and just mixing with others. and especially the fact that it's obvious that the most common response from parents is not swallowing the cost of childcare themselves or deciding not to work, but as to choosing whether to have children or not. Scotland's fertility rate should be 2.1, but at the minute it's 1.2, which doesn't bode well for the future. It's just stacking up problems, and then we will be looking for fewer people in the future to sustain the welfare system, which will be ever costly. Many governments are choosing to act on that, and Scotland isn't one of them, which is unfortunately a sad state of affairs.
Thank you, Mr Russell. I now call Gillian Mackay to be followed by Tim Eagle. Ms Mackay.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. And I want to thank Ros McCall for bringing forward this motion in the debate today. We've heard from parents up and down the country about not only how expensive childcare is for them, but for how difficult it is to find a place and how inflexible hours are. At the heart of this issue has to be a recognition about how the world has changed since those of us in the chamber were little. Gone are the days of being able to survive, let alone thrive, on one income, and parents need to go to work to provide. We also often live further from family members, and that so-called village feels more distant for many young families. And that constant pull between providing but being there and present for the wee ones is exhausting. Much of what we've heard from families is how difficult it can be to find a place. We've recently experienced that with Callan, how much of a rush it is to find any childcare, let alone the right childcare. We're extremely lucky to have a wonderful childminder lined up to look after him, but trying to find a place was pretty wild. As first-time parents outside of a major city, we maybe naively thought that getting a place would be relatively easy, but several nurseries had no space and childminders had long waiting lists. We need to make sure that the mix of childcare across the sector meets the demands of parents and children across Scotland. We need to make sure that these places are high quality and delivering the learning opportunities that allow them to flourish. These also need to be high-quality jobs that value those who work in the sector, the expertise they have, and provide further development opportunities as we look to expand those funded hours. Childcare is an investment in the next generation, but it also supports women back into the workplace. I have friends with 2 small children. They've spaced those children in age so that they have some funded hours for their older child by the time their maternity leave ends. Even with that, they're paying the best part of £2,000 in childcare. No one should be paying that, and funded hours shouldn't be serving as a family planning mechanism. The Scottish Greens want to establish a simple, universal free childcare guarantee, where all children in Scotland have access to funded childcare hours from 6 months until they start school. We want to extend 1140 hours of funded childcare to all 2-year-olds in Scotland as soon as possible, starting from the Monday after their 2nd birthday. This should be a priority for the first half of Parliament. Following that, we want to expand funded childcare for all children aged 6 months to 2 years, aiming to provide a universal 570 hours of funded childcare by the end of the next Parliament. This will be accompanied by capital funding to expand the number of places available to meet that increased demand, and significant investment in the workforce to ensure we have well-trained staff. We'll also ensure the increase in funded hours enables greater flexibility in childcare provision so that parents can access the childcare they are entitled to. This includes delivering more wraparound care to suit existing work and school patterns, increasing flexibility in council-run nurseries, particularly to accommodate shift workers, and reviewing and expanding childcare models.
The member is shortly going to be concluding her speech.
There are a number of other things we need to resolve, including the issue I raised at First Minister's questions on cross-boundary placements. So it's not an easy picture, but I hope that, given the consensus across the chamber, in the next session we can make progress on this issue. And I want to once again thank Ros McCall for bringing this debate forward.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. I now call Tim Eagle.
Well, thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I also congratulate Ros McCall on bringing this debate? It's interesting, actually, to hear across the chamber situations that I find myself in years ago. I'm very lucky to have 3 children. The youngest of those is now 10. And so the immediate sort of early years childcare has gone. I'm really just a waiter, I think, now to my youngest, who sort of looks at me in the morning as he watches TV, asking what sort of continental breakfast I'm going to provide. Well, that's kind of what he wants. But But I can remember those days. I can remember, and actually I don't think me and my wife really thought about it. We kind of decided to have children and looked at the pram and the cot and everything else, and then suddenly you think, hang on a minute, what do we do when we go to work with this child? And this is a child that needs you. Like, they don't need me so much anymore, but this child is following you to the toilet every day, wherever you go. And suddenly you need to know, where am I going with this child? And I didn't think about it. And it wasn't until that point, actually, and maybe that was naivety of myself and my wife, that we suddenly realised just how important childcare is. And that's why I think I actually agree with a lot of the points Gillian Mackay made there as well, and Megan Gallagher, and Davy Russell. So important, because we don't live in that age anymore where one parent can stay at home all the time. And by the way, I do think it's important, if a family want to do that, we should be trying to help as a government to try and facilitate that, because looking after children is incredibly important, but childcare is incredibly important. I was privileged as well to be the chair of the Children and Young Persons Committee in Murray Council when the Early Learning and Childcare extension came in. And I have to give credit, actually, to the government. I think that was a really good thing to do. And we tried our best in Murray Council to make sure that both local authority providers as well as private providers had the capacity to really deliver that across the area. Unfortunately, though, it didn't work. And although there is great stuff going on in Murray now, there is pockets across most of our communities, particularly in the most remote rural patches, where that just is not being provided, and that causes complexities, and then that leads to significant financial difficulties, which Megan Gallagher touched on at length. So I'm not going to sit here today and say, I remember that one of the first conversations I had with Ros McCall actually was around this subject, and we've had several conversations since. I am not an expert. I have been to events organised by Pregnant and Screwed. I think they are doing some fantastic work, and if I am lucky enough to come back after the election, I will continue to support everything they do and everything Ros McCall and everything anybody else does. All I want to say here today, the reason I wanted to speak is because I have lived and breathed this myself. We still live and breathe this, even though my children are older. Me and my wife are still battling that part-time, full-time hours to try and work out who's at home when they get home from school and everything else. It is something I think that should be absolutely at the forefront of the next government's mind, whoever they are. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Eagle. And I now call on Minister Natalie Dawn-Innes to respond to the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm afraid 7 minutes is just not going to be enough to deal with all the points that I've raised, but I'm more than happy to follow up with members following the debate. I really do want to thank members across the Chamber for taking part in this debate today, and for Ros McCall for bringing it forward. I also want to take this opportunity to again recognise the really hard work and the dedication of our partners in delivering high-quality childcare across Scotland. This government does remain absolutely committed to developing an accessible and affordable childcare system that meets families' needs, and it supports our mission to eradicate child poverty. And we've already come a long way. Our commitment to supporting children and families is evident in our continued investment of £1 billion per year to deliver 1140 funded hours of high-quality ELC for all 3- and 4-year-olds, eligible 2s and 5-year-olds who have deferred. We remain the only part of the UK to provide this offer, regardless of the working status of parents. Now, this offer is saving parents £6,000 a year, so for Megan Gallagher to say that that is half-hearted ambition, I just don't think that's doing justice to the system that we have at the moment. However, I would say, I will in just a second, however, I would say that me saying that is not looking over the fact that I understand that the system at the moment is not working for everyone, and I want to get to a place where it is. I will take the intervention.
Megan Gallagher.
To clarify, Minister, it's not about what you've put in, it's the fact that this government promised to expand childcare in 2023 from 9 months and onwards, and nothing has materialised. That, to me, is half-hearted ambition.
Minister.
Again, I'll come on to this, but it's not that nothing has materialised. There is a lot that has materialised, so I will come on to this in my words. Now, as I said, I know that families are still facing challenges. I met with Pregnant Then Screwed last year to discuss the impacts that a lack of childcare can have on parents who want the flexibility that increased childcare can offer. And government is very sensitive to these challenges. Alongside our funded 1140 offer, we're also exploring ways to expand provision of childcare through our early adopter communities, and we're delivering wraparound school-age childcare services to families most at risk of living in poverty. Now, we absolutely recognise that one of the most effective ways of tackling poverty is by enabling parents and carers to enter sustainable work. Through our No One Left Behind approach, parents receive parental employability support from a dedicated key worker, and that includes one-to-one tailored support to help reduce barriers to employment. Since April 2020, over 99,000 people have started to receive that support, and of this, over 30,000 were parents. In addition, our investments to deliver funded wraparound school-age childcare in some of Scotland's most deprived communities demonstrate the ability of expanded access to childcare and to support the Government's priorities of tackling child poverty and supporting economic growth. Over 7,000 children and their families, most at risk of living in poverty, are benefiting from funded or subsidised school-age childcare activities and related services through our investment in programmes such as the early adopter communities, Extra Time and Access to Childcare Fund. And we're seeing really positive outcomes for this. We're also seeing reported improved outcomes for children in relation to being able to access a range of activities supporting physical and mental health. In 26-27, we'll continue to invest over £5.5 million in our Extra Time programme. We will invest an extra £2.5 million to test delivery of a wider after-school activities offer for primary school children. Yes.
McCall.
I really appreciate the Minister taking this quick intervention, and I do accept wholeheartedly all the points that the Minister is making on where the Government has spent money. But will the Minister please accept that if that was working, we wouldn't have two-thirds of parents questioning why they are working just solely to put their children through childcare?
Minister.
Well, as I've said, I understand that it's not working for everybody, but the point in this investment is to improve things and to make things better. And as I've laid out, the increased investment year on year in this is having improvements for parents, appreciating that we have further to go. Now, several issues have come up, so I'm going to try to address those in turn. Now, in terms of early start dates, which Gillian Mackay has raised, I understand wholeheartedly. Now, I'm just going to set out a little bit of information and then give you where I think we should go on this. Arrangements for when children become eligible for funded ELC are set out under the provision of the Early Learning and Childcare Specified Children Scotland Order 2014. The reason for that was to enable small groups of children to start at phased points, making the system more manageable. But of course, I know that many local authorities were going above and beyond that. And I think it is extremely disappointing to see decisions being made that are reducing flexibility locally. And I absolutely think that this is something that Government will have to look at in the next Parliament. I think this goes alongside some of the issues that were being raised earlier around cross-boundary provision as well. Statutory guidance sets out that where possible, children receiving their funded hours in a setting outside the local authority that they reside in should be treated on the same basis as those accessing provision in their own local authority area. But there's not a specific statutory duty to make ELC available to children who reside in different authorities. But I want all families across Scotland to benefit from the ambition we set out jointly with our local government partners in Funding Follows the Child. And as I say, it is extremely concerning to hear of local decisions that are reported to reduce flexibility, choice and provider sustainability. And again, I would say that this is something that will absolutely have to be looked at in the next Parliament. Now, I hear what members are saying around affordability, and again, I hope that what I'm setting out today shows that the Government is trying to improve that. One of the things that concerns me greatly around affordability is the fact that I know that many families find it incredibly difficult to access the childcare benefit supports that they need and are currently entitled to. We know, for example, in Scotland, the uptake of universal childcare benefit is very low, meaning many families who could have up to 85% of their childcare costs covered are not currently accessing that. So, in terms of statistics, there are only around 11% of UC households where members are taking up those benefits, and same with tax-free childcare. It looks as if it's around 21% of the total childcare population. So there is money there that is not being utilised, and I would encourage members from across the chamber to encourage local parents to take up those benefits. I'm very aware that I'm over time, Presiding Officer, so I will bring my remarks to a close. But as I set out at the beginning, I really am happy to discuss further with members some of the points that they've raised individually. This Government is very clear that we will go further in supporting families and children. I've already alluded to the fact that we're delivering more funded after-school and holiday activities, and together with our free new National Breakfast Club offer, this takes us closer, I think, to providing families with the wraparound school-age childcare that they need. We're focusing our efforts at the moment on the families who need it the most, recognising the importance of accessible, flexible, free childcare. Once again, I would just thank all members for their contribution and their commitment to improving childcare for all families across Scotland.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate. I suspend this meeting until 2 p.m.